how can it be bad for you when our grandparents and great-grandparents used it all those years and they lived to their 80s? And if it was that bad, wouldn't they not have had cholesterol issues? So it's a big question that I think that somebody needs to tell the truth about.
We're neglecting a treasure to our own detriment.
This was a deliberate campaign, and I think people need to wake up to the fact that these things are done. Most people cannot imagine that anyone would do such a thing.
So they have us on a thin balance, and to me, that's sick.
I am baffled that we are where we are, that it's an uphill struggle at this point.
My name is Tamer Soliman, and I am a holistic nutritionist living in the Cayman Islands. In my time spent in this Caribbean country, I've always been drawn to its culture, its people, and especially its food. Coconuts in particular have always caught my interest. They're so plentiful and yet seem so rarely used here. And I wanted to learn what the people of the Cayman Islands had to say about it.
There were so many uses that we had for the coconut tree, not only for the shade and the beauty, but we used all of the products that you can imagine with the oil and the milk and the water.
I remember the smell of coconut oil, and whenever I smell coconut oil, I remember my grandmother's kitchen.
Cooking and cooking, frying fish and stuff like that. You couldn't beat it. You couldn't beat it.
So when I was a child growing up here, just about everything that we ate had some form of coconut in it.
Both of my great-grandmothers would have made coconut oil. And in fact, for one of them, it was her livelihood.
People used to make their own coconut oil here too. But we used to make, if like we want to fry fish, and we want to fry it with coconut oil because that fries it the best. Oh, that gives it a good flavor.
So from what people are saying, one could certainly argue that coconuts are a celebrated part of Cayman Islands culture. But where are they now? I've seen truckloads of coconuts in my time here on the island, but they weren't heading to a kitchen. They were headed to the dump. If coconuts are rooted so deeply in the history and traditional dishes of the Cayman Islands, why would such a valuable food now be considered garbage? Something has to have changed.
Because we were told that coconut oil had tons of cholesterol, so you had to stop eating it. And we were bombarded with, we have to eat corn oil, or we have to eat canola oil, or olive oil, or whatever. And that's the reason why most people, all you can hear people is, I can't have coconut oil because, it has all this cholesterol.
We've got the evil empire down there telling people that coconut oil is bad, that their native diets are bad, that they should be using shortenings in margarines and the liquid vegetable oils, and that these are good for them.
I really thought that the corporate attack on coconut oil was entirely responsible for its decline in popularity. But I learned that there are in fact many forces that led to the decreased use of coconut oil in the Cayman Islands. For example, at the turn of the 20th century, when coconuts were of enormous economic importance to the islands, diseases like lethal yellowing and bud rot ravaged the plantations. And when a hurricane swept through the Caribbean in the summer of 1915, the entire coconut industry in the Cayman Islands was effectively destroyed. And though they eventually regained their footing after these devastating setbacks, the islands never again matched their earlier coconut production levels or success.
We've had such an interesting history with this particular natural resource. It was an integral part of our society, and then as convenience and as westernization grew, and when I say westernization, I mean like development and having people from overseas move down here.
Then when our seamen started going to America on shipping, they they'd go home, get out, and you know, every payday they sent money home. Then we had to start having money then to buy stuff with.
The 1960s and 70s were years of prosperity for the Cayman Islands. But with the advent of supermarkets, attractive packaging of convenient foods, and television commercials, the wealth of knowledge surrounding coconut oil production vanished with the passing of the older generations.
Well, I think that a lot of the modern Caymanian doesn't have time or inclination to bother with making their own coconut oil.
You are faced with the situation where you either do all these things, produce the oil and then use it, or you go to a job, you earn a salary, you take that salary and you pay for something that somebody else has available, packaged, ready to go and put on the stove.
So you tend that when people go to the supermarket, they're on a budget, they're going to look for something that is inexpensive to purchase, not necessarily good for you.
Do you read labels? Well, you should, because here is where you can tell what you're getting before you spend your money. Your government, rightly...
This was a deliberate campaign, and I think people need to wake up to the fact that these things are done. Most people cannot imagine that anyone would do such a thing, but they do things like that. And we just need to use our common sense. What did the people eat in the past? We've only had these vegetable oils since 1900. And it was really in the 1950s and 60s that the campaign against coconut oil took off.
What's fascinating is that by the late 70s, articles began appearing in the Cayman magazine Nor'wester, describing coconuts as one of God's greatest and abundant gifts, and urging the people of the Cayman Islands to make use of them, noting they were being largely wasted. Unfortunately, more than 30 years later, this trend continues.
For a while, you know, they didn't want nothing to do with coconuts, and the coconuts were just wasting all over the island.
Why is that?
I really don't know. I think they got too Americanized. Pardon my expression.
You know, when people have coconuts in their yard and they throw them away in the dump. The dump is loaded with coconuts.
Vegetable oils and margarine were not only cheaper and more easily accessible, but also heavily promoted as healthier option in the later part of the 20th century. Coconut oil went from being the traditional staple used in all cooking to a forbidden food that was best avoided. The Cayman public had unfortunately embraced the unhealthy, damaging vegetable oil trend.
Medical community is also influenced by big business often and economics and politics. I mean, we can't deny that. And sometimes these things do drive and influence lots of what doctors and professionals have to say and do. And I think that's where we went off target a little bit.
This industry is powerful enough to change traditions, and what's happening is profits and their sales are going down in America. So what do? They just pack their bags and go off to some unsuspecting part of the world where the people are very loving and trusting and look up to Americans and believe what they say, and they're taking advantage of this trust and foisting this garbage. I mean, this is rubbish, this is trash. We shouldn't touch it.
Vegetable oils are a highly processed food. I mean, contrary to what it sounds like, you know, it's made from vegetables, it's a plant food. We think of those types of words as healthy, and they are when they're in their whole natural form.
Cayman Islands health is quite like first world country health issues. Diabetes, heart disease, obesity.
Right up there with the overconsumption of sugar and other processed foods. Experts would agree that vegetable oils make up one of the worst.
The liquid oils are rancid. They have a lot of free radicals in them, and this causes uncontrolled reactions in the body.
As in most of the developed world, diabetes is one of the leading health concerns in the Caribbean. And so perhaps the relationship between the overconsumption of vegetable oils and this disease warrants a closer look.
The trans fats block receptors in the cell membranes, and that's the main cause of type 2 diabetes. All these substitute industrial vegetable oils are going to block those. And it's not anything that you can fix with a pill.
Let's be very clear. The environmental impact of vegetable oil production is unmistakable. They are grown from genetically modified seeds. The crops are heavily processed with pesticides in the fields and with chemicals added later on to lengthen shelf life. What's even more unfortunate is that since the late 1970s, enormous amounts of pesticide residues have been found in U.S. groundwater, most frequently in regions that grow corn and soybeans, common crops for vegetable oil production. One of my favorite authors, Michael Pollan, suggests that we should remain skeptical of non-traditional foods, since historically, humans have evolved and adapted in relation to the local plants and animals. And as such, engineered foods, while perhaps appearing as improvements, can actually be interpreted as mutations of that evolutionary process, and not for the better.
And if you ever see that word, partially hydrogenated oil, then that should signal to the person that I am going to consume trans fats. By swapping something that was natural and perfect in its form that we could cook with, and we could keep our bodies in a better state of health and move towards something that was heavily processed, we created the diseases and we made these health issues that much more pronounced.
This is something that every population has to go through. It's like going through adolescence, in a sense, in our evolution. We had our childhood, we had the wise parents, Mother Nature, Father God. Everything was there for us. Now we're going through this stormy adolescence, where we rebel and we have to go through a lot of suffering, get our fixes from, all this processed food. But eventually, we have to emerge from that and become adults and be wise and thoughtful about what we put in our mouths.
Here's the good news. Inspiration can also be found alongside this troubling departure from traditional foods. For one, in the 1990s, a man named Jerry Sternin was able to identify successful and traditional practices in poor Vietnamese villages that had fallen by the wayside. Sternin called these practices bright spots and advocated their return to solve a child malnutrition problem. My belief is that our bright spot here in Cayman is the coconut, and that's because it's here and it's amazing for your health.
Our bodies are tropical. 98 degrees, that's tropical temperature, and we need the kind of fats you find in the tropics in our bodies.
The type of oil that coconut is, it is not going to go through the normal gastrointestinal tract to digest and break down. It gets processed in the liver, where the liver just readily produces the energy. So we actually don't store coconut oil as fat. We use it as energy. So it revs our metabolism up and we get that burning happening with our weight. Fabulous for somebody wanting to shed pounds.
The types of fats in coconut oil are the types of fat that your body uses for intercellular communication. And this is why we say all cancer patients need to be on coconut oil, because what is cancer? It's a problem with intercellular communication.
In fact, there's a study coming out now showing that coconut oil can be extremely useful for patients with Alzheimer's. Now, I'm not saying that persons should put away all their Alzheimer medicines, but it's found that coconut oil has some extremely useful benefits for persons with Alzheimer's, and persons should know that and read up on it.
There is not a shred of evidence that coconut oil has any effect on our cholesterol levels, not a shred.
Caribbean cuisine is high heat cooking at its finest. Fried fish, fried plantain, fried breadfruit, fried fritters. Jamaican chef Nigel Spence has said that coconut oil perfectly marries ingredients together and can create balance in any Caribbean dish.
It's the perfect complement to fish, because in fish you have the long chain unsaturated fatty acids, the omega-3s, the DHA, the EPA. In coconut, you have the short chain saturated fats, and makes a wonderful balance.
So, if what modern research says about the coconut is true, that it's one of the healthiest foods on the planet, then the only way people will see its benefits is if it's once more easily accessible. And all this made me think, is anyone taking this opportunity to bring local coconut oil to the Cayman market?
So in a week, we go through about 1,000 coconuts. We get them from 2 different locations. Then we take them home. We have them husked on a Sunday. Then it takes 20 coconuts to make a bottle. After all of that, we then begin the process of blending and squeezing. And after blending and squeezing, we let it settle on the counter, or sometimes we put it in the fridge, let it settle. And as the cream comes to the top, we skim it off, boil it, and then that's where it comes down to 2 parts, the custard and the coconut oil.
There's been a misconception in Cayman for the longest time that you can't do commercial farming here. I don't think you can do it on a large scale. If we had, say, 15 other farmers like myself that had good land, had water, and could do the same thing that I'm doing, we could feed a good amount of the population with most of the food that we eat here.
So what's your vision? What do you want out of this?
To start with, 10 acres.
You want 10 acres? Could you get 10 acres in the Cayman Islands?
Yes, I can right now, yeah.
And you would plant coconut trees on those acres?
Yes, full coconut trees, 1,000 trees right now.
I have 500 coconut trees here now, and I plan to plant 2,000 coconut trees.
You seem to believe that you could also export.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
With 10 acres, you could export?
No, not with 10 acres, with 100 acres.
With 100 acres. Could you get 100 acres in the Cayman Islands?
Yes.
You can get 100 acres
Capital.
in the Cayman Islands?
Capital.
And then you could have, at that point, when your trees are mature, you're saying you could
sell... In 10 years I'm planting, I can achieve that. 10 years I'm planting. I've sat down, I've done the numbers, I know exactly how much meat it takes to make it. I know exactly which tree makes the most meat, which tree makes the best meat. I know exactly which tree grows the fastest, which tree grows the slowest. It's a win-win-win.
But the beauty is that once they start bearing, they just continue bearing all the time. So my trees are still quite young because they're all planted after Hurricane Ivan, the years after that. So we have to just give them time to start bearing. But once they start bearing, I'll just have, tons of coconut.
It's doable in the Cayman Islands, but it takes capital. It takes capital. Some venture capitalists or some startup capitalists, some people that want to try something, it's worth a try because it can happen. It grows naturally. It does not stop bearing.
Because I don't think you can have enough coconut tree here on the Cayman Islands right now because everybody is realizing the benefits of coconut.
Anybody who thinks about the tropics, if they're asked to present an image of the first type of plant that comes to their mind, it's almost certainly going to be some sort of palm tree.
In the Philippines, they call the coconut tree the tree of life.
The coconut tree was called the tree of life.
As you would say, it's the tree of life for Cayman, you know what I mean? It is our tree of health.
I read an article by local author Barbara Curry Daly. She explains that traditional Caymanian cooking has never been properly recorded, and many recipes exist today only in the memories of those who once devoted long hours to creating delicious meals outdoors, one pot at a time. In the Cayman Islands, people enjoyed slow food long before it became a trend.
Barracuda, fresh, fried in coconut oil.
My favorite dish using coconut oil would be curry chicken.
I love coconut rendang with conch.
You can use the coconut oil to fry eggs. It's delicious. If you've tried frying eggs with coconut oil, it's just fantastic.
Ripe plantain, fresh, fried in coconut oil.
One of our favorites was, I'm going to cook it next week. It's salt beef and beans.
Callaloo, prepared with a little coconut oil. If you put those 3 together, good to go.
This thing that you've had all along is actually being proven to be something really valuable and valuable to the world.
Absolutely.
So it's an honor to have this thing in our lives that we've grown up with.
What we get out of it will depend on how imaginative we can be.
So I think the more we can get this message out there to people, the more we can see a change happen.
And I think once people are enlightened and they have alternative sources and they have the information, they will make the necessary changes.
Health benefits, the business benefits.
I see myself getting a factory and just helping Cayman to produce something from our people to export.
I think any oil that has been used by people for generations, for thousands of years, and to good effect, should not be easily discarded, and that is coconut oil.
If I have any message to the people of the tropics, it's honor your ancestors and eat the foods of your ancestors, because the foods that's coming from the white man is going to kill you.
It's so exciting to think that today, even with all the hurdles of the past, coconut plantations are once again possible in the Cayman Islands. I believe that we as a population need to create a national habit of daily consuming coconut oil. One small change, swapping out processed oils for pure coconut oil. And we can say with confidence that coconut oil has once more regained its rightful place in the kitchens of the people of the Cayman Islands. Coconuts are at our fingertips. Local coconut oil is within reach. These are the bright spots of the Cayman Islands. It's time for an oil change.
Listen, whatever you have been told before, it's a farce. Coconut oil is the real deal. So people around the world, get ready because it's coming to you soon.
Get an oil change.
Get an oil change.
Awesome.